The sun crept over the horizon, painting Millbrook in hues of amber and rose, its quiet streets stirring with the faint hum of a town waking to another day. On Oak Street, Evelyn Washington stepped out of her bungalow, her every movement deliberate, her shopping bag swaying gently at her side. The cracked pavement beneath her feet told stories of time and neglect, but Evelyn's sharp eyes were fixed on the present, cataloging the subtle changes in her surroundings with the precision of a mind that had seen too much to overlook the smallest detail. Across town, Officer Brad Hawkins sat slouched in his patrol car, the stale scent of coffee and frustration clinging to him like a second skin. His uniform, though crisply pressed, could not mask the wear of a man teetering on the edge of disillusionment. The world, in his eyes, was a battlefield of us versus them, and he had long since stopped questioning whether he was on the right side. Their paths converged with the screech of tires and the sharp bark of authority. Evelyn, unflinching, met Hawkins' suspicion with a calm that only decades of navigating peril could produce. But the tension in the air was electric, the kind that precedes a storm. Hawkins' voice, laced with misplaced anger, demanded compliance, while Evelyn's measured response hinted at history far deeper than the officer could fathom. The moment Hawkins' fist lashed out, the fragile peace of Millbrook shattered. Blood met concrete, and gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Yet, as Evelyn revealed the badge that spoke of a lifetime in service to justice, the narrative shifted. This was no longer a simple confrontation, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Millbrook's sleepy facade would soon crumble under the weight of truths long buried, as the collision of prejudice and power set the stage for a battle that would ripple far beyond its borders. The story unfolds in the sprawling world of Vandrel, a fractured land where remnants of ancient magic pulse beneath the surface. Towering crystalline forests shimmer under twin suns, while vast deserts of shifting glass stretch endlessly, remnants of a cataclysmic war centuries ago. Small, walled cities dot the landscape, each fiercely independent and governed by its own council. Trade caravans traverse treacherous routes, guarded against marauding shadow beasts that emerge under moonlight. The air hums faintly with magic, though its use is strictly regulated, as the scars of past misuse remain fresh in collective memory. At the heart of the tale is Kale, a stoic wanderer with a mysterious past. Once a gifted mage, he abandoned his craft after inadvertently causing a tragedy that destroyed his village. Haunted by guilt, he now travels as a blade for hire, avoiding magic at all costs. His path crosses with Lyra, a fiery and resourceful thief raised in the slums of the trade city Eldrin. Lyra seeks to uncover the truth about her parents, who vanished under suspicious circumstances tied to forbidden magic. The duo reluctantly teams up when they discover a shared enemy, the enigmatic Order of the Veil, a secretive group manipulating events across Vandrel. Their uneasy alliance is tested by clashing ideals, but their growing trust hints at a deeper connection. Together, they must navigate a world teetering on the brink of chaos. The quiet town of Millbrook erupts into chaos when a routine morning turns into an explosive confrontation, as retired FBI legend Evelyn Washington, mistaken for a threat, is assaulted by Officer Brad Hawkins. The incident, caught by horrified witnesses, exposes deep-seated corruption and prejudice, setting the stage for a seismic clash between federal justice and local law enforcement. The small coastal town of Windmere buzzes with anticipation as the annual regatta approaches. For Clara, a fiercely independent boatmaker, the event is more than a tradition, it's her chance to prove her late father's designs are still the best. Her goal is clear: repair her father's aging sailboat and win the race. Meanwhile, Sam, a newcomer with a mysterious past, arrives in Windmere seeking a fresh start. He's hired as Clara's assistant, though his lack of experience quickly creates tension between them. Clara's first obstacle comes when the boat's hull is found to have more damage than expected, threatening her timeline. Sam, eager to prove himself, suggests a risky shortcut in the repairs, but Clara's perfectionism clashes with his impulsive ideas. Their arguments reveal their contrasting personalities, yet moments of vulnerability hint at an underlying connection. As they work together, Clara learns of Sam's estranged relationship with his family, while Sam uncovers Clara's fear of failing to live up to her father's legacy. Their shared struggles create a fragile bond, though trust remains elusive. Adding to the tension, Clara's childhood rival, Evelyn, enters the race with a state-of-the-art boat, determined to outshine her. Evelyn's taunts and the looming deadline force Clara and Sam to confront their differences and find common ground, or risk losing everything. The morning began like any other in the quiet town of Rivermist, with the hum of life carrying on in its usual rhythm. Sarah, a reserved yet fiercely independent archivist, was sorting through a batch of old documents at the local library when the door burst open. A disheveled man, clutching a tattered envelope, stumbled in. His eyes darted around the room before locking onto Sarah. Without a word, he thrust the envelope into her hands and whispered, "They're coming," before vanishing into the streets. Inside the envelope was a map, marked with cryptic symbols and a single phrase, "Asterisk, the truth lies beneath." Confused but intrigued, Sarah's curiosity quickly turned to dread when she noticed a strange symbol on the map matching one she had seen in an obscure, centuries-old manuscript earlier that week. Before she could process the connection, the library's power flickered, and the distant wail of sirens broke the silence. By the time Sarah stepped outside, the town was in chaos. Unmarked black vans sped through the streets, and neighbors whispered of mysterious disappearances. The life she had known was crumbling, and the map in her hand seemed to hold the key to understanding why. With no time to lose, Sarah realized she couldn't ignore the urgency of the situation. Her quiet life was over. The commotion on Oak Street rippled through the quiet town, drawing curious neighbors to their windows and prompting early risers to gather at a cautious distance. Among them was 17-year-old Maya Patel, a high school senior with a passion for citizen journalism. Her smartphone captured every detail as she whispered updates into her live stream, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. For Maya, this wasn't just another headline, it was a chance to expose the injustices she'd long suspected simmered beneath Millbrook's tranquil surface. Meanwhile, across town, Police Chief Raymond Carter was finishing his second cup of coffee when the call came through. The grizzled veteran, just months from retirement, felt his stomach knot as he listened to the frantic dispatcher. He knew Hawkins was a liability, but this was a public relations nightmare. Grabbing his hat, Carter muttered a curse under his breath and headed for his cruiser, the weight of decades of institutional complacency pressing heavily on his shoulders. At the scene, Evelyn stood with quiet dignity, her badge still glinting in the sunlight. She declined assistance from concerned bystanders, her sharp mind already calculating the implications of the incident. This was no isolated act of misconduct, this was a symptom of a deeper rot. And Evelyn, ever the strategist, knew exactly how to leverage it. As the first squad cars arrived, Hawkins stumbled backward, his bravado crumbling into panic. The officers who stepped out exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty to a colleague clashing with the undeniable gravity of the situation. One of them, a rookie named Officer Jamie Lopez, hesitated before stepping forward. Her voice wavered as she addressed Evelyn. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical assistance?" Evelyn's piercing gaze met Jamie's, And in that moment, the young officer felt the weight of accountability settle on her shoulders. "I'm fine," Evelyn replied, her voice steady but firm. "But I suggest you take your colleague into custody before this gets any worse." In the background, Maya's live stream was gaining traction, the comments section exploding with outrage. Across the state, a young attorney named Malik Johnson watched the unfolding drama from his office. A civil rights advocate with a reputation for taking on impossible cases, Malik's instincts told him this was a fight worth joining. Reaching for his phone, he began making calls, his mind already racing with strategies to turn this moment into a movement. As the sun climbed higher, the sleepy town of Millbrook was wide awake, its long-held secrets on the verge of exposure. Evelyn, brushing dust from her jacket, knew the battle ahead would be fierce. But she also knew that sometimes, it took just one spark to ignite a revolution. The aftermath of the confrontation rippled through Millbrook like a stone dropped into still water. Evelyn, though shaken, maintained her composure as paramedics arrived, their concern evident as they tended to her injuries. Around her, a small crowd had gathered, their whispers a mix of outrage and disbelief. Among them was 17-year-old Maya Patel, a high school senior with dreams of becoming a journalist. Her smartphone trembled in her hand as she live-streamed the scene, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Across town, Police Chief Harold Grayson was jolted from his morning coffee by the frantic buzz of his phone. The words incident, FBI, and assault blurred together as he hurried to the scene, dread pulling in his gut. Grayson, a man nearing retirement, had spent decades navigating the delicate balance of maintaining order while shielding his department from scandal. This, however, was a crisis he couldn't ignore or contain. Meanwhile, Evelyn's mind raced even as she reassured the paramedics. She knew the stakes. This wasn't just about her, it was about systemic rot, a culture of unchecked authority that had festered for far too long. Her instincts told her Hawkins was a symptom, not the disease. She resolved to dig deeper, her decades of investigative experience now laser-focused on the Millbrook Police Department. Hawkins, sitting in the back of another patrol car, felt the weight of his actions crashing down. Panic clawed at his chest as he imagined the fallout. He'd always been able to talk his way out of trouble before, but this time was different. The badge he disrespected was now his judge, jury, and executioner. As Evelyn's badge glinted in the sunlight, Maya's live stream gained traction, the comments section exploding with calls for accountability. Unbeknownst to Maya, her footage had already reached activist groups in neighboring cities. Within hours, the sleepy town of Millbrook would find itself at the epicenter of a national debate. The tension wasn't confined to the streets. At City Hall, Mayor Patricia Langley stared at her phone screen, her carefully curated political career flashing before her eyes. She'd long relied on the police union's support, but now, silence could cost her everything. Choices loomed, alliances frayed, and the clock ticked toward an inevitable reckoning. The aftermath of Hawkins' reckless act rippled through the morning like a stone dropped into still water. Evelyn, steady despite the pain radiating from her cheek, rose with a quiet dignity that silenced even the most vocal onlookers. Her badge, glinting in the sunlight, was more than a symbol of authority, it was a lifeline to a justice system she had once believed in. But as her sharp eyes locked onto Hawkins, she saw not just a man, but a symptom of a deeper rot she had spent her life fighting to expose. Hawkins stumbled back, his bravado crumbling under the weight of his mistake. The crowd, now growing in size, murmured in outrage, their smartphones capturing every angle of the scene. For Evelyn, this moment was no longer about her, it was about what came next. She had spent decades dismantling systemic corruption from the shadows, but now, thrust into the spotlight, she realized her fight had taken on a new dimension. As the distant wail of sirens grew louder, Evelyn's mind raced. This wasn't just about one officer's prejudice, it was about a culture that had allowed it to fester. Her resolve hardened. She would not let this moment be reduced to a fleeting headline. Millbrook was about to become the epicenter of a reckoning far greater than anyone could have anticipated. When the first squad car arrived, Hawkins' panicked attempts to explain himself were drowned out by the crowd's demands for accountability. Evelyn, clutching her badge, stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Officer Hawkins assaulted a federal agent. I suggest you take him into custody." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, caught between loyalty and the undeniable evidence surrounding them. This was no longer a small-town incident. Evelyn's name carried weight in Washington, and she knew it. As she stood amidst the chaos, blood still drying on her face, she made a silent vow: this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a battle for justice that would challenge not only Millbrook but the very fabric of the system she had once served. The crowd that had gathered around Evelyn and Hawkins was growing, their murmurs swelling into a cacophony of disbelief and anger. Among them stood 19-year-old Maya Patel, a journalism student home for the summer, her phone held steady as she recorded every second of the unfolding chaos. Maya had always admired Evelyn, who often shared stories of resilience during their chance encounters at the bakery. Now, seeing the elderly woman bloodied and humiliated, Maya felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just an incident, it was a story that needed to be told. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, Police Chief Harold Grayson sat in his office, nursing his second cup of coffee. The crackle of the police scanner interrupted his thoughts, and the words altercation and elderly woman made his stomach drop. Grayson, a man of quiet integrity, had spent years trying to reform a department resistant to change. He grabbed his hat and keys, knowing this could be the moment that either cemented his efforts or unraveled them entirely. As Evelyn stood, her badge still gleaming in the sunlight, her sharp mind was already piecing together the implications. She recognized the faces in the crowd: teachers, shopkeepers, and even the mayor's wife. Their presence was no coincidence. This wasn't just about her, it was about a system long overdue for accountability. Hawkins, now visibly trembling, tried to stammer out an apology, but his words were drowned out by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Evelyn's gaze locked onto his, not with anger, but with a calm intensity that unnerved him. "You've made your choice," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Now, we'll see what justice chooses." As the first patrol car arrived, Evelyn noticed Officer Maria Lopez stepping out, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Lopez, one of the few officers Evelyn had mentored during her FBI days, had always looked up to her. Their eyes met briefly, and Evelyn's subtle nod conveyed a silent request: do what's right. Back at the station, Grayson was already bracing himself for the fallout. He knew this wasn't just a PR nightmare, it was a reckoning. As he sped toward the scene, his mind raced with questions. Could he still salvage the department's integrity? Or would this incident expose fractures too deep to mend? The aftermath of Hawkins' reckless actions sent shockwaves through Millbrook, but for Evelyn, the stakes were far greater than personal vindication. As she dabbed at the blood on her cheek with a tissue handed to her by a trembling witness, her mind raced. This wasn't just about one officer's prejudice, it was a symptom of something deeply rooted, something she had seen too many times in her career but had hoped to leave behind. Across town, Police Chief Alan Monroe sat in his office, staring at his phone as the first reports of the incident trickled in. Monroe, a man teetering between his loyalty to his officers and the growing unrest in his jurisdiction, knew this was no ordinary complaint. Evelyn Washington wasn't just a victim, her reputation and connections made her a force to be reckoned with. And with the growing crowd outside the station demanding accountability, Monroe realized his carefully maintained facade of control was crumbling. Meanwhile, Evelyn's estranged son, Marcus, a passionate civil rights attorney, received the news in his downtown office. Their relationship had been strained for years, but this was different. The image of his mother, bloodied but unbowed, reignited a fire within him. He packed his briefcase, knowing the battle ahead would require every ounce of his skill and resolve. As the town buzzed with outrage and media vans lined the streets, Evelyn quietly returned home, her movements deliberate. She retrieved a locked file from her study, a dossier she had been compiling for months. It contained evidence of systemic corruption within the Millbrook Police Department, a project she had been working on in secret. Hawkins' assault, though personal, was a catalyst for something much larger. By evening, the lines were drawn. Protesters filled the streets, demanding justice, while Monroe scrambled to contain the fallout. Evelyn, Marcus, and a coalition of allies prepared to shine a light on the shadowy practices that had plagued Millbrook for decades. As tensions reached a boiling point, Evelyn knew the final confrontation was near. Every thread, her past, her fractured family, and the town's buried secrets, was converging toward an explosive reckoning. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable as Evelyn Washington took the stand. Her composed testimony painted a vivid picture of the morning that had shaken Millbrook to its core. With precision honed from decades of investigative work, she dismantled the defense's attempts to frame the incident as a misunderstanding. Across the aisle, Brad Hawkins sat slumped, his once defiant posture replaced by the weight of accountability. The evidence against him, witness testimonies, smartphone footage, and his own history of misconduct, was insurmountable. Outside the courthouse, the town of Millbrook was undergoing a reckoning. Protests had swelled into a movement, uniting residents across divides of age, race, and class. Evelyn's story became a rallying cry, sparking demands for police reform and accountability. The mayor, under mounting pressure, announced sweeping changes, including mandatory body cam usage, bias training, and the establishment of a civilian oversight board. For the first time in decades, Millbrook's citizens felt a glimmer of hope. As for Evelyn, she returned to her quiet bungalow, her life irrevocably altered. Yet, her resolve remained unshaken. She began mentoring young activists, sharing her wisdom and reminding them that change, though slow, was possible with persistence. Her actions inspired others to confront injustices in their own lives, proving that courage could ripple far beyond a single moment. Now is the time to reflect on the systems we uphold and the biases we ignore. Engage in conversations, demand accountability, and be part of the change. Justice begins with awareness, but it thrives through action. Will you rise to the challenge? The aftermath of that fateful morning rippled through Millbrook like a stone dropped into still waters. Evelyn, despite her injuries, refused to let anger cloud her judgment. Her experience had taught her that systemic change required more than outrage, it demanded action. As news of the incident spread, Evelyn became an unlikely symbol of resilience and accountability. Her calm yet firm testimony before local and federal investigators laid bare the toxic culture within the Millbrook Police Department, sparking a broader conversation about prejudice, power, and reform. Officer Hawkins, stripped of his badge and facing criminal charges, found himself grappling with the weight of his actions. For the first time, he was forced to confront the biases that had shaped his career and his life. Whether this reckoning would lead to redemption or further ruin remained uncertain, but his fall from grace served as a stark warning to others who wielded authority without accountability. For the town of Millbrook, the incident became a catalyst for change. Community leaders, activists, and law enforcement worked together to implement reforms, fostering a fragile but hopeful sense of progress. Evelyn, ever the strategist, quietly guided these efforts from behind the scenes, her wisdom and experience proving invaluable. As the sun set on Millbrook weeks later, Evelyn stood once again on Oak Street, her headscarf fluttering in the breeze. Though her steps were slower, her resolve was unshaken. The morning's events had reminded her, in the world, that justice is not a passive ideal but an active pursuit. Let this serve as a call to action: question authority, challenge injustice, and never underestimate the power of a single voice to ignite change.